Today on Saving Lives, Preventing Youth Suicide, we will be seeking solutions. What can we do as a community to bring awareness to youth suicide? And how parents, educators, friends, and others in their lives can help young people who are at risk. Stay tuned, there is so much more ahead on this very crucial topic.
Larry Burns, President and CEO of the Children's Foundation.
I'm pleased to partner with Detroit Public TV, Kevin Song, and other key organizations in this series of conversations on suicide awareness and prevention. At the Children's Foundation, our goal is to make a positive, lasting impact on the health and wellness of families in Southeast Michigan and beyond. Today's program is an important step in creating a dialogue on the issue of suicide in our communities. Please join us in this effort to address this urgent problem and share solutions for families and their loved ones at risk. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I'm Cynthia Canty, and I want to thank all of you for joining us on what's going to be a crucially important discussion. The suicide rate for teens in Michigan has doubled over the past decade, surpassing national trends. It is the second leading cause of death among our youth, so little wonder people are calling youth suicide an epidemic. Today's discussion is part of a year-long campaign by Detroit Public Television, Kevin Song, and the Children's Foundation. A campaign to shine a light of compassion and understanding on an issue that has all too long remained in the shadows. We'll show you some video segments from a documentary produced by Kevin Song, and then our esteemed panel will tackle some of the issues and questions that it raises. So we'll be considering today a preface to the 4th Annual Conference on Suicide Prevention. Kevin Song will be hosting on January 23rd through the 25th in Plymouth. More on that later. But now let me introduce our panel. Kevin Fisher, the Executive Director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Michigan. Gigi Colombini, the founder and the psychotherapist at the Institute for Hope and Human Flourishing. Nancy Buell, School Safety and Student Assistance Consultant and Psychotherapist at the Macomb Intermediate School District. Leo Nuhan, Board Member and Conference Coordinator for Kevin Song. Cheryl King, Professor and Director of the Youth Depression and Suicide Prevention Program at the University of Michigan. Welcome to all of you, and please let's start by having each of you talk a little about who you are and the work you do in suicide awareness and prevention. And Kevin, let's start with you.
So NAMI is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization that's purely dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans affected by mental illness. I personally got involved with NAMI 9 years ago after losing my oldest son, Dominique, to suicide. So, of course, this is very personal to me.
The Institute for Hope and Human Flourishing has its focus on working with, in the outpatient mental health setting, those who are struggling with suicide. So whether it's thoughts of suicide, suicide attempts, or those who've lost a loved one to suicide, sort of the whole spectrum in the place where it's most needed. So our focus is really strong in the outpatient setting in order to make a difference.
The Macomb Intermediate School District is in service and support to 21 local school districts in Macomb County, and we are very dedicated to reaching out in service and support to those districts. And my position specifically at the Intermediate School District is to help bring technical assistance, consultation, training, and crisis intervention services out to our 21 schools.
Yeah, Kevin Song was founded a number of years ago by John and Gail Urso, who lost their son Kevin to suicide. And as their friend and now fellow advocate, I am working with them and with Kevin Song to help to empower communities to prevent suicide and to offer hope and healing to those that have suffered a loss.
As a clinical psychologist and a professor, my work has focused on the problem of youth suicide for many years, primarily as a clinical educator and a scientist. And working with many colleagues, our overriding goals are to improve the recognition, screening to recognize youth at risk for suicide, improve risk assessment strategies, and develop interventions that actually make a difference and help us to prevent suicide.
Well, it is wonderful to have this collection, this great collection of advocates and resources here today. So thank you for being here, and we all really look forward to your insights. Now let's turn to some very moving thoughts from Fritz and Jojo Klingler, whose son Nicholas took his own life when he was just 17.
He was a smart kid. He had lots of friends. He was a good student. He had a great sense of humor. He had a lot of things that helped him hide this condition that he had. And he was good at it. He was good at hiding it.
We went through a crisis with our son, and we had a certain number of days to try and get him help, and it was a struggle to get that help. It was a struggle to get into a psychiatrist. It was a struggle to get good advice. You know, we had doctors telling us that, you know, we signed a contract with Nick. He's going to be okay. He signed that he wasn't going to hurt himself.
A contract that you're going to sign with a person who's, by definition, mentally ill. If they're going to start talking about taking their own life, you're going to have them sign a contract and expect that they're going to honor that contract? They're going over a waterfall. We got bad advice. We were told, don't hospitalize him. That'll just be traumatic. That's what we were told. We had 10 days to respond after we learned that he had depression. We had 10 days before he took his life.
We need to validate that people feel this way. We need to talk about it and bring it out in the open so then it can be addressed. That is what I wish Nick would have done. He suffered from depression. I think looking back now, we can look back and see he had it for a long time. I wonder if he, if he could have talked about it and had some help figuring it out. I really do think things would be different.
This is the second leading cause of death among young people, and it would seem that we want to address it more effectively than we are.
The first big hurdle that we need to get over is talking about it and addressing the stigma to it, because I think there's a lot more people that are affected by this than the numbers reflect.
That is heartbreaking and all too common. And the question is, why is it so difficult for parents of young people to get the help they need, secure treatment? And what do we do if we sense that a friend or a loved one seems to be in trouble? Kevin, I want to start with you with that question. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, access to treatment is a problem, not only in the state of Michigan, but nationally. But the other part of it is the stigma that's associated with mental illness and suicide. There are so many of us parents who would like to think we know our children well enough to recognize the signs, but we don't. And if we don't have this dialogue with them and help them be comfortable expressing themselves, we won't close the gap.
And Gigi Colombini, as a psychotherapist, Kevin used that word stigma, and it seems anytime we talk about mental health issues, that word stigma comes up. Is it the problem that has always been? Are we getting any better at addressing it and shining a light on mental health challenges?
I think the kids are better at it than they used to be, but we're tasked with caring for them, the parents. And it's a really scary thing. There's not a lot known about it. People aren't talking about it enough in the adult world. Kids talk about it with each other a lot: depression, anxiety, bipolar. But when the parents begin to suspect something, they think it's normal teenage stuff. Like, it's really confusing to understand what's going on. And then when they hear things like your kid has anxiety, depression, or they've been thinking about suicide, they really often go into, what did I do wrong? And so then the parents are going through their own little crisis, and it's really hard to understand what the kid's going through. There's so many dynamics that happen there when it comes to this conversation of mental health, mental illness, and then you add the suicide component in there. It becomes really scary, and a lot of other stuff comes up. So there's this big hope that this isn't really happening, or that I'm mistaking it, or I'm making a bigger deal of it than it should be.
And I want to bring you all in on this. And just thinking of having been a parent of a teenager, there's so many ups and downs anyway that go along with being a teen. And as a parent, it's very hard to know what is normal teenage angst. You know, I got a C- on the test, so I'm crying right now. Versus something that could be deadly, as they found. Cheryl, what have you found in your research as far as how parents can best discern when to really feel alarmed?
Well, I think it is really difficult to pull what is the sustained depression and risk from the usual ups and downs. And one thing is that I don't think we can rely that this is all on the parents, because it is really natural or can be expected that teens begin to pull away from their parents. Many of them are not sharing their personal lives, their angst, with their parents. It's very difficult to recognize and to not, when you just see one sign, to think that this is another example of a bad day, or it's a disappointment, but they'll wake up and tomorrow will be better. And so I really do think it takes a community, and that's why we do so much with awareness with peers and teachers and others who may be on a day or in a place where they recognize it when we can't as parents. But one way to distinguish is that often there may be a withdrawal from usual activities, maybe a sense that overall my child is not getting as much pleasure from life, they're not as engaged in life or as engaged with other people. And then of course there's signs of sadness or sleep disturbance or more alcohol and drug use or more angry outbursts and agitation. But what makes it extremely difficult for parents and for all of us is that there's no one risk factor or symptom that's necessary or sufficient. And youth at risk for suicide are really heterogeneous, really varied in how they present. So we can't say to a parent, here's the one thing to look out for. It is complicated, and that's why I think it takes all of us and a lot of awareness. But overall, we're looking for a change. The pattern has changed. I'm worried. I have a gut feeling that something is wrong. And sometimes I think that's all a parent has to go on. It's a gut feeling, and what we want to do is encourage them. If you have this, go and get an evaluation. Or if you have this and you're not the parent, it's okay. It's hard. You don't want to take a problem to someone, to go and tell this parent that you're concerned about their child.
What struck me in that piece we saw about the Klinglers is their strong feeling that they got bad advice. No, we shouldn't put him in a hospital. It's going to traumatize him. He signed a contract, so he's not going to harm himself. How does a worried parent know? You're a psychotherapist, so how does a worried parent know if they're not getting the best advice?
It is so hard because we expect the professionals to have training in it, and we're really working on that. It is not the case. Those who should know don't necessarily know about suicide. And so it's difficult. So I often am coaching parents to, when they're trying to find somebody, ask the clinicians how familiar they are with dealing with people who may be thinking about suicide. That's a step, but it's a difficult thing. And then the other side of it is the gut thing. Like if what you're feeling is incongruent with what you're hearing, even from the professionals to some degree, try to push more. It's very confusing and very hard. It's hard to, I don't want to blame anybody. Nobody's to blame here. So much more needs to be done. But in the professional world, emergency rooms, clinicians, family medicine, all those people typically are sort of addressing mental health crises with our families, all need way better training on suicide prevention.
Well, I was going to say that I think the thing that that impresses me the most is that there just needs to be more people aware, more people who are looking for the signs, or if they see the signs, they would recognize the signs. So as parents, we think we know our children, and we try to identify when they're in crisis or in a stressful situation, but there's so many other people that could help us with that.
Such as?
Well, in the schools, and Nancy knows this very well, there are teachers, cafeteria workers, bus drivers. We see this in the hospital systems where they have a zero suicide program, and they train everybody in the hospital to be aware of the signs and symptoms of someone that might be suffering from a mental illness or might be suicidal. And then when they identify someone, then they kind of team together to help them. The same thing should happen with young people in the schools and out in the community where they are. And even if we project it into the workplace, there are so many places where if people were just aware of what to look for, there could be more people who could reach out. And it doesn't take a whole lot sometimes to stop somebody from taking their life. Sometimes it's just a gentle touch or a gentle word or just to know that someone cares. And if we don't even are aware of that, if we don't know that, then we can't help to be part of the solution.
Kevin, I've heard this again. I've talked to people. I've seen it in my own life. This narrative that somebody you love is in some kind of a mental health crisis. You get on the phone and you try to get help, and you get told, "Well, we have an appointment available in 2 months." Do you hear that a lot? And what's it going to take in this state where we treat mental illness challenges the same way that we treat physical illness, where we have an urgent care, you have a place to go?
I think it's going to take a combination of players to get involved. Certainly, the legislature and the administration has to understand that this is an epidemic, and and it needs to be a priority, and that there needs to be investment. We don't have enough behavioral health professionals in the state. We don't have enough available psychiatric beds in the state. Those things we have to address immediately. Now, I understand that there's a budget, and maybe there's not funding in the budget today for that. But how do we partner with private hospitals that may have beds available? How do we partner with private behavioral health professionals and make more of those resources more accessible? That's where we have to start.
All right. Let's turn our attention now to what one school, Dakota High School in Macomb County, is doing to help its students. We're going to meet Stephanie Lang, who's developed a very successful suicide prevention program there.
The fact of the matter is 1 in 6 high school students in the United States will seriously consider suicide before they graduate. So if you look in any regular classroom, that's like 4 or 5 students. We're outnumbered here. We have maybe only a few hundred staff and 3,000 students. And so working with some local experts, I kind of thought more about putting our energy into training the students to really be the ones and not to rely so much. Training staff is important, and they may see something through an English paper or through an art depiction or something like that. But we really thought, let's train these students to be the ones who feel confident and comfortable in recognizing and coming to an adult right away if they see something that could be concerning related to mental health. So there's a lot of strategies that students can use, and it's really just letting them see that they have a lot of options, and waiting isn't really one of them. The student assistance program, when we're talking about suicide prevention specifically, right now it's evolved into all 9th graders will receive a 1-hour classroom presentation in their English class, where I come in, I talk about student assistance, how the student assistance program could be of assistance to them throughout their years on the campus. We talk about how to help a friend who might need some help. So it may not always be about you, but it might be about someone that you care about, that you're worried about, like something's different with them. Maybe they sent you an interesting text message that's kind of bothering you. We tell kids to follow their gut. We also do something called, I made this up, it's called the mental health fire drill. How many of you guys have ever done a fire drill at school? For 9, 10 years of your life, you've been going outside 2 or 3 times a year just in case, right? And I know that 1 in 7 high school students are going to seriously consider suicide before graduation, and we've never planned for this. This is not great planning on our part. We are going to do a little bit of thinking about this, because once you're worried about your friend, it's very difficult to problem solve. Your brain has a really hard time problem solving when it's under a lot of stress. But then I say, how many of you have actually been in a building that was on fire at school? And like, nobody has. So then we say, this is what a mental health drill. So we want to think about a crisis like a fire before it's actually happening. So that's one of the activities that I really feel is helpful for them. So we kind of walk through, who would you call? Who would you go to? How would you do it if it was you or someone that you care about that you think was having a mental health crisis? And that's kind of their homework, to take that home to that adult in their life that they know they would go to and practice. You know, how would we manage this? So that the first time they're doing this isn't when there is someone's life possibly at stake, or that emotions are running so high that decision-making could be, you know, interfered with. There's also the use of our form online, of reporting any kind of behavior from a student that they feel might need attention. Those kinds of things are really important, and I think that shows that the students are going home and having these conversations with an adult, and that it is reaching out into the community, because we really don't want students to think that this is something that can't happen here.
Nancy, you're from Macomb County Schools. Unpack this a little more for us. Are there lessons that parents and other school districts could learn from Dakota High? Should schools throughout the state be adopting a similar approach?
And yes, I think that a lot of schools across the state, and certainly in Macomb County where I support, do have programs. Might not be specifically like what Stephanie is doing, but across the board there are signs of suicide, sources of strength. There's multiple programs and initiatives that schools can pull from. And I think it is very important, and I think Stephanie mentioned this, the goal is to have every student, every grade, every year. She's correct when she says she's one person. You do not have to be a mental health expert to make a difference in this. And really, we can train every staff and every student to make a difference, to help bring hope to those who might be despairing or suffering. And it's not all that difficult to do.
And that's what I'm wondering, because there are a lot of school districts throughout this state who are strapped for funding. Money is tight. Can you do an effective mental health awareness and suicide awareness effort without having a lot of money to spend on it?
I believe yes, and I think that it takes turning too. So I'm at the Intermediate School District. We are a service center for our local county school districts. In the state, there are multiple intermediate school districts, or RISAs as they call them. They hopefully can help resource and leverage a lot of the community help that we have available. I think Cheryl said earlier that it takes a community to do this. Really, we're all passionate about this, we're all concerned about it, but we're kind of working in silos. And until you bring us all together and we recognize that we have this same goal, that we can actually bring people in from the community, that doesn't have to cost the schools a lot of money. We have in Macomb County, some of our schools actually train the teachers to use curricular pieces to educate their students. What they need to know is, once you get a student that you're concerned about, that is kind of going beyond what typical adolescence is to the atypical adolescence, that's be comfortable asking the question and get that student to the mental health professional who will be trained. As Gigi said, we have clinicians out here who know how to ask the question, who might know how to do assessment for suicide, but do they continually hone their skills? I mean, it's really unfortunate. I'm going to go back to the last segment when they're talking about a contract, but it's been years and years since we've learned contracts are insufficient. We have moved to safety plans. And so sometimes people in education and in the clinical world will say, I've been trained in suicide prevention, I got this. I never get tired of going to suicide prevention trainings. I've been doing this for 30-something years. I never can get enough. Every year, multiple times a year, I'll read introductory books. I'll read more advanced. You just have to saturate yourself if you're in the clinical world to make sure you're on top of the most current research, so that you can reach out to parents who might see signs, who might have that gut feeling and not know what exactly to do with it.
and take them by the hand. I love this idea of the community. The community is your region, it's our state, the community of our state. And Leo, I understand the governor's office has proposed a suicide prevention plan to be implemented in 2020. Can you tell us a little about the plan and its status?
Sure. The state had a statewide plan back in 2005, but it hasn't been updated since then. And Governor Whitmer did ask the Department of Health and Human Services to try to update that plan. And basically, this suicide statewide prevention plan would set forth some goals and objectives and some strategic objectives to guide not only governmental programs, not only legislation, but to guide employers, to guide school systems, to advise communities on different strategies that work to build awareness of suicide and also to develop effective means of prevention. And so it's kind of a four-pronged approach. It's building these coalitions, which is so important, like Kevin mentioned. It's that we all speak with one voice. It's also about research. It's about effective treatment. And it's about prevention and everybody doing their part. So this goal, the goal of this plan is to lay this out so that local communities can rely on that plan and develop their own local strategies. And it can be used by the business community, it can be used by the mental health community. It will give us all a roadmap so that we can all work together with one unified voice to combat this problem and help save lives.
A best practices roadmap.
Absolutely.
And that's very important. We were talking about schools. We cannot talk about schools and teens without talking about the impact of social media and technology on their mental health. When I was in school, and if I was not invited out on the night out with the friends, I didn't know about it. I didn't have to go on and see all these happy pictures on Instagram or Snapchat that I am not a part of. I didn't have to worry about text messages being screen grabbed and shared or photos being screen grabbed or shared. How do parents best help their kids deal with this thing that is not going to go away with these smartphones and with technology? What are some ways parents can help?
It's good if we think about the technology in the same way that's kind of the way we used to just hang out with our friends. That's how they hang out. And we had limitations. We couldn't stay out till all hours. We didn't have access to everybody. We remember the Tide phone. We weren't allowed to be on the phone after a certain amount of time. It's really okay to say phones in the kitchen or phones out of the bedrooms. Like, it stops because otherwise they don't stop. They don't turn off. That's one good way. And then there's also, I don't know the apps offhand, I meant to copy those from, we had a speaker last week, that there's some apps out there that help you track if you're really concerned about your kids. But limiting the amount of time they're exposed to the social media, like, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever is a normal time for your families, to phones go away. It's okay for all of us.
I think even talking with your youth, and this can be a partnership between parents and schools as well, but they're on that social media, and I think it's worth some education to let them know that it's okay to not feel and not to engage in some of this chatter and some of this conversation. You've heard of FOMO, fear of missing out, and to educate our youth that what you're seeing in that social media world is not necessarily the reality. I know as my children were growing up, I would tell them, and I still use it, don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see. You may see this on social media going on. Everybody wants to paint a beautiful picture that there's happiness because inside there can be some distress. But then when we're observing that, we get the sense that we're missing out on all this. It's not all it's portrayed to be. There's good and there's bad in this internet and social media world, and we need to educate our youth to use the good and to be weary of things being so perfect out there.
I know I've seen it watching as my daughter went through school, and you'd get those group texts going, and things don't have nuance when they're texted. So you may be saying it jokingly, and suddenly you see things just go off the rails. And I bet you've seen in your years of research, Cheryl, how impactful social media can be and the technology that they've got.
Yeah, I think from a research perspective, we're trying to figure this out. Yeah. Like, we know that we don't have a big increase in the rate of mental illness or mental disorders in the short last decade, and yet we had a big increase in suicide. So that naturally has us turn to what has changed, what's different in the world. It must be sociocultural. There's something bigger than just looking at the individual. And I do think a big part of it may be the left out, the FOMO. Another thing we're finding that goes with that is sleep interference. And we've learned over and over now, and probably everyone in our audience is aware, when you have a bad night's sleep, the next day is rougher. And we actually can have a sadder mood, we feel more distress, life is harder. And this social media use, because probably the fear of being left out, if we don't take the phones away, as I agree with what you're suggesting, they are on these on and off through the night so they don't miss what is going on.
We know you are, kids.
Yeah, so
we know it. We see that light. Now let's listen and meet Will Heininger. Will works at the U of M Depression Center, and he had his own personal battle with depression while he was a famed athlete at the school.
I just started to notice pretty quickly, like within the span of a few days, or at least at most a week, like these incessant negative thoughts and questions about the world. And instead of going away or, just kind of sliding by like maybe they had or I'd never noticed them before, I couldn't answer them and they would keep coming back. I remember looking in the mirror and thinking like, what is wrong with you? And I'm gonna beat this, like still having that confidence. That's why I didn't tell anybody. That's why I put on the face every day and, tried to go to work and to football and to class before I would come home and let it all out to my mom. And I remember her saying every day, I know you don't believe this, but I promise you will get better. And I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. I didn't believe I would ever get better. That was the way my brain was working at the time. So, it was the end of practice, and I think, coach says a few words, and everybody kind of comes in, and you put your hand in the middle and break it down. And that's when I broke down. I felt the tears coming on. I felt overwhelmed. I didn't care anymore. I had hidden it for so long, and I just was so low, like I didn't care. And thankfully, my athletic trainer, he saw me, and he knew, and he came, and he put his arm around me, and he said, Will, come with me. We'll take care of you. You're going to be all right. And he walked me into Schembechler Hall and into a woman's office named Barb Hansen, who I credit in part with saving my life.
Motivated by his personal experience and a desire to help others, Will was instrumental in procuring a grant from the NCAA, which led to the development of Athletes Connected, a program created in collaboration with the U of M Depression Center to increase awareness for student-athlete mental health issues.
So we talk about a construct called a continuum of well-being, or a spectrum of well-being, if you will. And on one end, you have, flow is the psychological concept, but high functioning, peak performance, best you've ever felt, in the zone, if you will. And on the other end, you have severe clinical issue, suicidal ideation, and so on, that every human being on the planet falls somewhere in that spectrum. And we don't always stay at the same place either. The truth is we fluctuate, right? Based on life stress and accomplishment and adversity and you name it. And just having to pay attention to how you feel, right, is the beginning of building that skill of paying attention to how you feel. Unfortunately, untreated, anything, tends to get worse and to have a bigger impact on us. I so believe in integrative care, right? There's these multiple supports that hold anybody up when you're recovering from anything, but especially with mental health issues. One of the things I've learned from my experience with depression and anxiety is just how common these issues are, and then how treatable it is, and how important it is to get treatment.
Is very, very impressive. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Will, and he tells a powerful story, and he says his life was saved by turning to important people in his life. Cheryl, you have done some groundbreaking research on suicide prevention. Share with us some solutions that you have discovered when a young person is caught in that darkness and doesn't see that there's a light on the other side.
I think the intervention that we've developed, that we've found to be linked with reduced deaths among youth at risk, is based on how do we harness the power of adults in young people's lives to be helpful to them. So it very much parallels Will's story with his coach, who he says may have saved his life. And what it is that as adults, I think we all want to be helpful to youth who are in high distress, a lot of angst. They've made a suicide attempt, but we don't necessarily know what to say or do. We're afraid we might make it worse. We know there's stuff going on in the family. We don't want to intrude. In other words, we need help to be helpful, and we may need to be invited in to help. And what we did with the youth-nominated support team was invite the youth to nominate adults in their lives from different domains, their school, their community, their religious institution, their extended family, adults they trust. They may not be real involved in their life now, but they wish they were more involved. And then what we did was, with their permission and their parents, we invited those adults to come in, learn about what the youth was struggling with, what treatments were recommended, and how they could help the youth and family as an extended support to encourage treatment adherence and positive behavior choices. And I think this is an example where it's youth empowerment because they're identifying the adults, but it's also helping and supporting the adults. They didn't only come in and learn. We had weekly contact with these adults for 3 months to help them with any questions or concerns they had as they connected with the youth across that time. Now, certainly we want to replicate this, but we showed very significant effects in mortality across the next 12 years. So this is not in place of our usual and traditional important treatments like medication and psychotherapy, but this is something that could be done in addition to help the youth and the families over time.
That is a fantastic, fantastic approach. I remember in talking with Will about Athletes Connected, and he made such a good point about so often, especially when they're starting college, and here he is an athlete on top of that, you got to keep the game face on. You can't let people know what you're feeling inside. And he hit the point where he cracked. Let's talk about using that, and he spilled it out to the right person. Is it okay to say that word suicide? If you're somebody who, you mentioned people don't want to make it worse. And I think there might be a fear that if I say it, I might give them an idea. Who wants to, you're nodding, go, yeah. Saying the word, putting it on the table.
It's interesting because so a couple of thoughts, but as you're speaking, I'm thinking of a few things. Earlier we mentioned there's not a whole lot of urgent care.
Right.
We do have an urgent care. It is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And so in that sense, getting that number out and helping anybody, but specifically youth, know that it's okay to call that number in the interim or text it. We have texting hotlines as well. Then that can be their stopgap until they can get into services that might have long waiting lists. But what you're speaking to, I support schools after there's been a tragedy or a death. And so I'll go and I talk to the youth and help them to kind of process what they have just experienced. And I always leave them with this question. What adult in this building would you say knows you the best? I ask it that way on purpose. I don't say, who do you know the best? Because that tells me that that adult has shared a lot about them. I say, who would know you the best? Because that tells me they shared something about them. And I say, that's the person you want to brush by for the next few weeks, because they're going to notice if you're having a bad day. They're going to notice when you're happy. They're going to notice when you need an ear. And then when I train the teachers, I tell them, don't worry, I'm not telling them that you're going to be their therapist. I'm just saying that you're going to know enough to notice that you have to get them to that next level, which can be that stopgap. I think it's huge.
But then the training absolutely including that getting the person being trained comfortable enough to use the word suicide. It's something over and over again. I'll be sitting with a family with a kid in the room and say, you need to ask, and they'll skirt around how to say it, and I'll say, no, say it here. Are you talking about suicide? Are you thinking about suicide? It's a hard word. When it's a loved one, it's a really hard word to say, even as a professional, but it's so important to say the word.
What insights do you have based on what happened with Dominique?
Well, Dominique was, I think, a little unusual in that Dominique lived with schizophrenia. So Dominique, I asked the direct question with Dominique about a year before he passed if he had suicidal thoughts or if he was considering suicide. And he told me, I have the thoughts, but I won't do this. And quite frankly, I think it was the symptoms of his schizophrenia that ultimately led to his suicide. But I would absolutely echo what Gigi has said. We adults have to make sure that our young people are comfortable talking to us, that we're not going to judge them, that we're not going to invalidate their feelings, that we're here for them, and that we will listen. And what we've learned is that young people are really comfortable, a lot more comfortable having this conversation than we are. We have to get past ourselves. When people often ask me, when we talk about this term stigma, who's perpetuating it? Frankly, it's us. It's us parents. Our young people are so much more comfortable talking about being in therapy and taking medication and how they feel. But if we don't make them feel safe and receptive, they won't. They just won't come to us.
That starts when they're tiny, doesn't it?
Yes.
It doesn't start when they're in high school or they've packed up and they've gone to college. That has to start when they're really tiny.
Yeah. But it's also okay to say, like, I've learned this now. Your kid's now at 16, and you've learned new information, and then to start there. Like, I'm just getting this information. Have you ever had thoughts of suicide? Like, just to put it out there, even though there's nothing worried now. Start the conversation anywhere. It's so important.
I'm interested in what happens, since we're talking about a student in college when he was going through this. So your youngster goes off to college, hallelujah, I got into college, I'm excited, and then they realize, I've seen this again and again with kids that I've talked to, that first year can be very, very bumpy. Mom and dad are at home, they're in the dorm, and you start getting text messages from your kid that as the child is trying to work things out. And you don't know where to go, and they're over 18, and so you can't call and ask anything. What are some do's that parents should, do's and don'ts with parents when a child is kind of going through some turbulence and adjusting to that freshman year away?
Yeah, I think this is a real tough transition for the parents and for the students. And one thing that we try to encourage our counseling centers at the university is when a student first comes in, it would be fine, when there's no crisis at that point, to at that point get a release signed. Who could we go to? Make it more matter of fact. May we go to your parents if there's a crisis? Because if they do that at that point, then they are able, and often we do need the families. Because what happens early at the university, right, some people come in with a blast and they integrate and they're doing well, but it's a lot of new pressures. It's the academic pressure, it's the social pressure, particularly when you're trying to develop a new peer group. And then also we have increasing alcohol and drug use to face because it is so available on all of our college campuses. So you have all these risks coming together. And I think we need to do some resilience work with our children before they go about expecting these pressures and figuring out, maybe as what you're saying, who are you going to go to there? You can call us, we invite you to, but it doesn't have to be us. But let's figure out who you might turn to during this time, which may well be pretty challenging.
Yeah, and it's hard as a parent, and I see heads nodding here in our audience. You get something, a text or an expression of concern, you want to fix it.
Yeah.
You want to fix it, you want to make it better. So I think at times we risk you don't know how much is over-involving and how much is, go little bird, fly, fly from the nest. And how to get that right, that's hard.
That's really hard. And I think when it comes to the language of suicide, just asking, we can't take a blood draw to know if somebody's suicidal. Asking the question is how we can know, and asking if ever. And then if somebody's not suicidal or thinking about suicide, you're not going to have them think about suicide by asking the question. It's not going to happen. But if they have, they'll be relieved that you're willing to have the conversation, and to simply say, gosh, if you ever get there, we'll figure this out. Talk to me, talk to another adult you trust. We'll figure it out. There's lots of things that can be done, but only if we know it's going on.
Good script.
And I think we need to let them know too that you're going to have adversity in your life. And helping our youth to know that they can withstand that. I've asked my kids at dinner time, and if I'm doing trainings out to the schools, best part and worst part about your school day. I always end with worst part. People, it's interesting because people will shift it. Well, I'm not gonna end with the worst. I'll end with the good news. But my point is, say the worst part. It didn't literally, pun intended, kill you. You can stand and withstand that. And with supports that we help build in, there's an app called the Virtual Hope Box that we can do when people aren't in crisis. Let them build that strategy about what are they going to do to distract themselves when they're having high emotionality that may be leading to a suicide thought or gesture or attempt. And then what do you need to do beyond distracting if that's not working? Just build the safety plan with them and let them know that times are tough. You don't need to give in to these thoughts.
That's great dinner conversation. That is, you've just added, I think, to a lot of dinner conversations. I want to talk about Kevin's Song now and its upcoming conference. This wonderful organization started by Gail and John Urso, whose son Kevin took his own life in 2013. They have brought people and organizations together for the cause of suicide awareness and prevention, so no other parent has to go through what they did. Gail and John are with us in the audience today, and we want to thank you so much for all that you do and all that you have brought. So thank you so very, very much for taking what happened and turning it into a force for good. Thank you. Thank you. And let's listen now to what people had to say about Kevin's Song at last year's conference.
Recognition that depression is no different than other illnesses, and an acceptance that this person didn't want to die as a result of depression. That kind of an awareness made Kevin's death less painful. And I think it's an important message to get across.
He was 41 at the time, and we were shocked and devastated. We had no idea that this was a possibility. We also didn't know how common suicide was. We just thought we have to do something about this so that hopefully other people cannot have to go through what we're going through.
My wife, Gail, and I co-founded Kevin's Song after losing our son to suicide in March of 2013. Like many of the people you'll meet during the course of this weekend, Gail and I responded to our grief by deciding to do something about the suicide epidemic. This conference is one of the results of that decision, and we're thrilled and grateful for all of us to be here this weekend.
Suicide has lived in the shadows for far too long. People don't talk about it because they're ashamed, they're afraid to. Bringing it out of the shadows is the only way that we are going to combat it. We need awareness to change opinions.
How can we get people in the throes of their crisis to think about what is on the other side of their despair? We can't just leave this up to the mental health professionals. I do believe every day mental health professionals are providing life-saving work, but we can't leave it just up to them, because some of the most at-risk people for suicide are not finding their way into mental health services.
Since the turn of the century, the suicide rate among teens has gone up significantly, not just in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County. It has gone up significantly in Michigan. It has gone up significantly across our nation.
Why should healthcare systems care about suicide? It seems obvious probably to most of us here why we should care. I will tell you that nearly 90% of people have a healthcare visit in the year before they die by suicide. We have an opportunity to intervene during those visits.
We've really opened the lens up to wonder, where does this behavior come from in nature? The idea is to figure this out so that we can prevent it.
Leo, can you tell us about what people can expect to be happening at this year's conference? When you've got that 3-day block, I bet you could really do some important work.
We really have put together, I think, a very comprehensive conference this year. On Thursday of the conference, we are running a concurrent program called the School Summit. And so we have invited mental health professionals and educators and people that specialize in focusing their work on youth. We've invited them to present to educators from across the state, to teachers and superintendents and school board members. We want to give them tools that they can take back to their schools to help, as many people on this panel have talked about, helping them to assess kids at risk, helping them to help kids through crisis, helping them to work with parents and with other community members to prevent those children from being at risk and from doing something serious and taking their lives. So the School Summit will run at the same time as the regular conference. And during the regular conference, we have many opportunities for mental health professionals, for first responders, for people that work with veterans, for employers and individuals that, other advocates, other nonprofits. We have speakers from all areas, from all parts of the country that are coming in. And the theme of our conference this year is advocacy and action. And so the whole point is, we're kind of tired of talking about awareness. We're tired of saying prevention is important. We need people to act. And that's why it's good that the state is putting together this plan that will be rolled out in 2020. But we need the business community to step up with their time and their investment in Michigan. We need the legislature to invest in this community. We need school systems to make the investment, like the mental health, the community health organizations are doing. We need everybody to join forces, as we like to say, with one voice to combat this problem. And that's what we hope to bring to the people that attend the conference. And you can go to our website, kevinsong.org, and you can register there. It's very affordable. We provide you with breakfast and lunch and keep you hydrated all day and just provide you with the latest in research, prevention, and advocacy.
Who should go? Who should attend?
Everybody should go. I mean, if you're a mental health professional, you should be there because, like Gigi said, many of them don't have the tools that they need to really address suicide. Educators should go so they can learn more about what they can do. Legislators should go. Community leaders should go. Police chiefs, EMS individuals, people that work with veterans. We have a very high rate of suicide among veterans and our military. So it really is for everyone. Medical personnel, educators, professionals, individuals, and the whole program on Saturday is geared towards people that have had a loss, people that have lost someone to suicide, or people that have attempted suicide. We call those people that are have a lived experience of suicide. And so those survivors come together on Saturday and they share their stories and they look for hope, and we hope to provide them with a healing message on Saturday. So we provide the whole panoply of research, prevention, and hope. And that's what we're hoping to do, and we're hoping to get people to start taking action.
And people, so you can register now by going to kevinsong.org.
kevinsong.org.
I want to end with you, Kevin Fisher, as when you think of the work, the statewide view of the work you're doing with NAMI Michigan. Where do you hope Michigan will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, in terms of addressing mental health concerns?
First, I'd like to see the state recognize it as a priority. Has to be a priority. And in that, there has to be components for prevention. There has to be a component for investing in resources. And there has to be a component for attracting and retaining behavioral health professionals, and making this, as you mentioned earlier, a dinner table, a living room conversation where we eliminate that stigma. It sounds really clichéic and simple, but the most good we can do is talk about it, to normalize this conversation so people aren't afraid to address it. Addressing it when it's in crisis is almost too late. We need to work further upstream. I lean toward the prevention side that says if we talk about how to take care of ourselves better, our mental health care, then we go a long way toward eliminating the number of suicides we experience each year.
We've gotten so much from what you have all brought to this, and when you think of that narrative of the fact that we've seen such an acceleration in teen suicide in the last decade in the state, it's the work that you all are doing and others in your area that we want to see that narrative change. We want to see that narrative. We want to hit the brakes and take that back down and see that happen in Michigan. And so I want to commend the 5 of you and all of the groups you're involved with for the work that you are doing, because it is absolutely needed. And speaking as a mom and a grandma, you know, we want this for our families. So we want to thank you so very, very much for what you've done and for being with us today. And that is about all the time we have. So again, thanking from the bottom of our hearts our great panel and our wonderful studio audience. I know I really did learn a lot today. I hope you did as well. Suicide is a terrible, terrible problem in our society. But if there's one takeaway from this discussion we've had, is that there is hope and there is help for people who are suffering from depression. All of us who surround them must help them find the treatment and the care that they need. I'm Cynthia Canty, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.